Hello, beautiful people. Before we get into today's episode, I want to talk to you about the sponsor of today's podcast, and that is Tuesday Treasure. This is my weekly newsletter where I send out and compile the coolest things every week that I find. And that could be from conversations, books, articles, tweets, whatever it may be. And people enjoy this newsletter because it's simple, informative, it's quick, it adds value, it leaves people with more energy after reading it than they had before, and it's very easily consumable. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, you can go to dannymiranda.com/Tuesday and sign up for that newsletter. You can also find an archive of previous episodes at that link, dannymiranda.com/Tuesday. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Now let's get into today's episode. And this is with Dr. Yusef Smith. He's a personal trainer, a doctor, and the co-creator of Propane Fitness. This is a business that helps people increase muscle, lose fat, improve their mindset, become more productive, and they help personal trainers expand their own businesses. So Yusef and his partner Jonny, who will be on the podcast later, have been putting content out on the internet since 2008. They're knowledgeable, they're funny, and they're interesting guys. And Dr. Yusef got his medical degree while running two businesses, so he knows a bit about productivity and he's quite the smart guy. I had such a great time with this conversation. It was such a joy to speak to someone who's so humble, so intelligent, so smart, and I really think you guys will enjoy this episode. If you do enjoy it, let me know on Twitter at @HeyDannyMiranda. I absolutely love your feedback about the episodes. If you have anything to say, let me know on there. And that's pretty much it, guys. I look forward to hearing what you guys think about this episode. And let's get to it.
Interesting people, thought-provoking conversations, nutrition for your brain. Journey through the minds of the world's top performers and discover what it really takes to achieve your highest version. This is the Danny Miranda Podcast.
How's your day going, brother?
Yeah, it's going well. This is kind of the firefighting day. So just catching up on all the admin, clearing the inboxes, sorting out all the kind of scheduled stuff. So yeah, feeling on top of it.
Do you have specific days for specific things? Like, do you batch like that?
Yeah, so I have project days, firefighting days, and my my main problem is not really having proper off days. And I know that's like it's funny, it's like the problem of kind of overachieving personalities that they struggle to fully take a day off. So that's where I need to improve for sure.
But when you say firefighting days, it makes it seem like you're behind. Why don't you call it like something else? You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. I suppose to call it like shallow days or however you want to see it. Yeah, it's this is kind of the problem that we were talking about last time of like setting up on multiple channels all at once a few years ago, and rather than kind of nailing one channel, we've now just got like an equal flow of queries and support tickets and everything coming in through email, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. So it's a bit fragmented. So sometimes you just got to sit down and be like, right, just going to run through all the platforms and just clear everything at once.
So what is like a firefighting day for you? Like, what are you doing today? Like, just recording this podcast? Like,
well, the podcast is kind of an anomaly. This would normally be a project or a creation day.
Gotcha.
But yeah, firefighting day, like, I try and keep them separate so that the mental frame that you're in can be preserved as well. I'm very much a fan of just going deep with a specific task, and I think context switching is just the biggest thief of our energy and productivity. And the more that you're moving between different types of tasks, the more fragmented your attention becomes as you leave this kind of attention residue behind for each previous task.
Yeah, man, it's so fascinating that you say that, because I'm actually taking 2 classes right now, one intro to psychology class and one statistics class that has to do with psychology as well. And at first, when I started taking these classes, I was like, okay, I'm going to do one module from one class, one module from the next. And what I realized is my brain was going in different places. So then I just started to focus on one class, and I was going to do one class for 1 week. And then after that week, I would change to the other class. And what I found is that it gives my brain more of an opportunity to really internalize the material. So it's very interesting that you say that.
Nice. It's so weird, isn't it, that just like by having the same slot of time, but treating the allocation of tasks differently, you can get so much more depth out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just run it with this, because I think that will be valuable to other people. And, this is what this podcast is all about, just a conversation where we could learn more about you, have an interesting conversation. Yeah, let's just keep that in and let's run it.
Let's go for it, man. And thank you for having me on as well. I'm really glad that you connected with me. I think you're someone who brings positivity and authenticity and discipline to Twitter. And I think this is very much the energy that people are needing at the minute. So you're doing the good work.
I appreciate that, brother. And what I hope to achieve with this podcast is for people to see, you see one thing with tweets and you see one thing with written word, but it's another thing to hear it in the voice of someone, right? You get a different perception of who they are, and maybe a more authentic and maybe realer perception. So thank you for the kind words. And I really just want to present that same energy that I'm writing on Twitter into audio form as well.
It's kind of the perfect barbell of content creation, because Twitter has to be extremely refined and brevity is king, obviously. So you're really having to cut down your thoughts and give the least nuanced, most punchy version of your values. But then in podcast, you can free flow a bit. You can actually explain the nuance. It's perfect, because then you're able to, from a content creator's perspective, like you develop the skill of doing both, of elucidating on your thoughts and also creating the long form stuff. But also for people that listen to you, they can then get more Danny with the podcast.
Yeah. So enough about me, though. Let's talk about you, and let's talk about, you've been doing this online stuff, this online business stuff since 2008. Most people haven't even lived that long. And, it's like 2008 seems like so long ago. So talk to me about consistency and how you've stayed true to one thing for so long. And the one thing is Propane Fitness I'm talking about. But talk to me about that, brother.
Yeah, it's funny. The time has flown by, isn't it? Like, I'm seeing patients that were born after the year 2000, and they're like obviously 20 years old. And it's like, bloody hell, what has happened? So we set up, me and my business partner, Jonny, who I was very lucky to meet. He is the smartest person I know. We set up Propane Fitness back in 2008, really just as a sounding board for our thoughts and to put our ideas down on paper. And it was mainly to try and distill the overload of information of fitness online. There's a lot of conflicting stuff, obviously a lot of shysters and kind of scammy information that you had to kind of see through. And we thought, well, if we can at least bridge the gap for people to see what is actually essential in gaining muscle and losing fat, then we're happy that our work is done with that. So it wasn't really intended as a business, but, and we'll come back to this, I'm sure, but I actually think that's the best way to start any business, is not to have money as the focus, because it does just cloud your judgment and you start making decisions that veer away from offering your truest gift. So we did this. We started to get a few organic inquiries. We took on our first coaching client for £12, which is about $15. And made a lot of mistakes along the way. And over that time, we've really moved from doing one-on-one coaching to group coaching to information products to leveraged coaching. And now Propane Fitness is very much a machine that kind of runs on its own steam. And so we've pivoted more to helping other people do the same thing. So people take their skills, particularly personal trainers or coaches, and move it online and be able to quit their full-time jobs a lot of the time. So that's been the journey that we've taken so far.
That's amazing. And it happened, you said. So one thing that I wanted to touch on was about your business partner, Jonny, and I'm sure your good friend. You know, you were, 18 when you started this? And
yeah.
How did you, know that, okay, this is the person that aligns with me? Like, how did you come to that decision, that conclusion, and was it just natural? How talk to me about finding a business partner that works for you.
This is such an important point, and I was just quite lucky that Jonny and I both fell into a groove of having different skill sets. And obviously, since from the age of 18, you grow a lot and you build out a lot of your skill sets over time. So when you're running a small business, as you know, you are the accounting department, you're the marketing department, you're the delivery, you're the operations, you're the tech, you are everything. And so it's really fortunate to have someone that you can work with where you can split the duties and start to grow your skill sets in different directions so that things complement each other and so that you can really scale. The situations where a business partnership doesn't work well are either where both parties have kind of overlapping skill sets and they're stepping on each other's toes, or they're unwilling to learn and unwilling to make decisions based on the evidence and based on the numbers, and instead have a lot of ego involved in that. Because if you're going to be clashing egos all the time, then you're not moving towards a common goal. So you've got to be aligned with where you want the business to go, but also be willing to just base your decisions on the evidence and move in that direction.
So how did you guys actually meet? Like, was it just through school or lifting?
Yeah, we went to school together. So we'd be training in like the school gym. Jonny tried creatine at the age of 16, and I was like, whoa, man, you got to avoid those drugs. Like, they're bad for you. It was it was a crazy time.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And it's like, just to understand and been through so many of my own journeys and my own failures and quote unquote failures in terms of starting things and stopping businesses. It's really fascinating to see someone who stuck it out for so long. What do you think really the key to your success was in terms of sticking out? Is it just that you truly, at the end of the day, loved fitness and you believed in the mission and it aligned with you?
On one hand, yes, but you've got to be able to evolve and move with the market. Mm-hmm. And as I say, I think we made every mistake in the book, but the key is, I think something's only a mistake if you're continuing to repeat it, if you're continuing to bang your head against the wall and not get the results. And so from a fitness perspective, we actually turned that into our advantage. And every fad diet that we tried, every stupid training program, we just documented it, posted it online, did kind of debunking style content, and used that to help our clients avoid the same mistakes that we did, to kind of save them the time. And when someone signs up for coaching, that's what they're doing. They're buying time. They're buying someone else's experience so that they don't have to go through the same ball ache that the coach did. That's why I think if you hire a coach, you need to make sure that they've at least had some semblance of experience in doing the thing which you're trying to do. And ideally, they should have already achieved that. It should be several chapters ahead. So the same thing we've done with business now as well, which is the main offering that we do at the minute, which is we've made a lot of mistakes with our marketing and our delivery, and we've arrived at systems now that are fully scalable, that give us a lot more freedom of time and location, while giving the best result to our clients as well. And so that's kind of been the evolution of the process. And I think it's actually okay to be to show your failures and to be authentic in that. I think it's more credible. A lot of people are afraid to do that. They feel like they have to come across as perfect or only show their highlight reel, as you were saying the other day. But it's not relatable. And I think it's okay to be a fallible human as long as you can demonstrate that you're growing and learning from it.
I think it's counterintuitive, but it's so important to internalize, especially if you're a business or you're starting a business, because we have this impression, especially today in the Instagram world, that everything is perfect and that people's lives are perfect. Few people are posting about how, awful their life is or the worst thing that happened to them. But what's really interesting is that when you start to show your failures, when you start to say, hey, here's where I fell, it actually, like you were saying, makes you much more relatable, makes you like a person's looking at that like, oh, I've been through that too, or oh, I know someone who's been through that. And yeah, man, kudos to you, because it's not difficult. It's not easy. It's very difficult to shed your skin and to say, hey, look, this is where I've gone wrong. But it's immensely valuable to the person on the other end.
You're totally right, especially with something like Instagram, where people have created the highlight reel. And when you've got someone who's looking like they're living this absolutely perfect life, that's very much a visual appeal. And people follow that because it's aspirational, but they can't relate to that person. They're certainly not someone that they would buy from. And really, if you're looking to kind of get your message out there and resonate with people and ultimately to do business with them, then it's the same as having in-person relationships, just obviously using the leverage of social media, which is what we have. And it reminds me of a study from, it was that they basically got this professor to come into a room, into a lecture hall, and deliver a talk. And it was the same talk delivered, but the only thing that they split tested was the professor comes in, trips over and spills his papers on the floor in one of the tests. And at the end, people reported that they liked the professor who dropped the papers significantly more than the one who didn't.
Wow.
So he's shown some kind of chink in his armor. He's demonstrated that he's human, and people relate so much more with that.
Wow, that's an incredible study, and I'm probably going to put that in my newsletter this week, because
nice.
Yeah, it just goes to show. Tuesday Treasure, for those who are not familiar, DannyMiranda.com/Tuesday-treasure. Always got to be plugging. But talk to me, brother, about so one of the things that I've realized is that, fitness plays such a important role in my life personally, because it allows me to center everything else. It allows me to just be that keystone habit. If I'm lifting weights, then I'm also eating right, that I'm also dressing correctly in terms of well-built style. And so talk to me about that. Talk to me about like how fitness has played a crucial role in being the keystone habit in your life, if it has been.
Yeah, this is, you mentioned that fitness for you is like a pulse. It's like something that is the rock that is the centerpiece around the rest of your life. And although it's a bit cheesy, I'm sure you've heard that quote of like 200 pounds is always 200 pounds. The iron will never lie to you. It'll always give you its fullest and everything. And there's definitely some truth to that. And the thing that I think people often miss, and it's us bloody doctors' fault actually, because we've developed medicine and the way that we categorize the mind and body as separate entities. We follow the Cartesian model of mind is in one plane and body is in a different one, and they're separate things. Whereas there's no anatomical point where mind ends and brain and body begins, for example. So having a training practice and seeing it as a very siloed thing that you do is the wrong way to look at the whole thing. Obviously, there's the physiological effects of brain-derived neurotrophic factor and improving mood and cardiovascular health and all that stuff too. But if you can expand it in a broader sense, then we're developing discipline, we're developing reliance on yourself, trust in yourself and your consistency. Plus, obviously, all of the stuff that's surrounded with body image and sex drive and confidence and self-perception. I think there's so many far-reaching elements of having some form of training practice. And the reason that with Propane Fitness we focus so much on fat loss and muscle gain is that at the end of the day, everyone wants to be a bodybuilder. Nobody want to lift no heavy ass weights. The thing is, people don't people all have some degree of bodybuilding goal, but they often don't realize it because they look at a bodybuilder on stage and they go, oh, well, I don't want to look like that. Mm-hmm. But fundamentally, everyone would like to have less fat and more muscle.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, so I think this is it's a good goal to shoot for, even if long term it's to feel better or to perform better. There's always going to be some element of that, and to have that as part of your motivator is always going to be helpful. And anyone that says that that's not the case for them, you've got to ask them, like, would they still train if it had zero effect on their physique, or if it made their physique look worse? Probably not.
Yeah, it's so fascinating that you say that, because to me, someone who isn't saying that, like, oh, I want to build muscle or lose fat, and that's not like a goal for them long term. Someone who says that in many cases just isn't being honest with themselves, right? And hasn't taken the time, because I'm just speaking from personal experience here. It's like when I was 20, 21, wasn't lifting weights regularly, I was saying to myself, like, I was lying to myself basically, like, oh, I don't need to go to the gym. It's not for me. Like, I'm weak to begin with, so who cares? And it's just a lie that I was telling myself. And I think that a lot of people who aren't in the gym, who aren't working towards some sort of health or fitness goal, are saying the same things to themselves, just lying to themselves. And it's just
so
something
interesting.
Yeah, it's something to really think about. If you're not currently in the gym, if you're not following a workout plan, are you lying to yourself, or is there an actual reason? There definitely could be, but it's something to consider for sure.
It's a kind of societal white lie that it's not okay to be vain, that it's not okay to want to look better, or there's lots marketed to that, but people have a sense of shame with that, or the other white lie is, and it's very much come along with the body positivity movement, is that we shouldn't be judged on how we look. And while I totally support the sentiment of that, unfortunately, we've got to see that there is an idealized world as how we would like it to be, and there is the world as how it is. And we can't live in a delusion of denying what the evidence is showing. Unfortunately, people looking at photos of fat and lean people will ascribe characteristics to those photos about the person's character. So based on the data, people will assign personality traits of laziness, less wealthy, less gregarious, less sociable, and someone that they wouldn't hire, to someone who is fatter compared to someone who's leaner. When they look at someone who's leaner in a photo, they'll say this person's more intelligent, more sociable. They're better to be around. So people have these inbuilt prejudices, and while it's important to personally undo any prejudices that we have ourselves, it's giving yourself a disadvantage in a world where people do think this way. So I just think there's no argument not to do the best that you can to polish the body that you've got.
Absolutely, brother. And when we're honest with ourselves and honest with how we think, it really allows us to like and honest with our own biases, it allows us to then take the steps to do the work. Like I'll look at someone and if I see that, they're jacked, I'm just like, oh wow, like I know they've put in work. I know at some point in their life they've spent hours in the gym. They've spent hours thinking about what they eat. And it gives me a level of respect for that person that I never would have had if I just, like if you're presenting a neutral person. So it's really cool to see. And by the way, like lifting weights and someone who's jacked, that's great. And also it's great who's someone who's like a marathon runner, a long distance runner. Like that's so cool to me too for a different reason. It's really just about putting in the work. Have you put in the work? And yeah, man, it's something that we just see and we want to, we're just immediately drawn to that, or at least I am.
Yeah, I suppose there's another dimension which you've just pointed out there, which is that if you see someone who's jacked, lesser so with the marathon runner because they have to, they're not wearing it on their body, but someone who's got, 80 pounds of muscle on them, more than the average person, you're right that there is no shortcut for that. There's no cheat code. Yes. And so as a result, that person has to have certain characteristics of consistency and a degree of obsessionality as well to stick to something to produce that result. And your body doesn't lie.
Yeah, absolutely. So switching gears kind of a little bit, the reason why I found you was because I had stumbled across this YouTube video, this podcast called Modern Wisdom, and I just saw 3 English dudes just sitting around a table, and I was like, you know what, these dudes are pretty cool. And what's really interesting is that I then found you on Twitter, I don't know, like 3 months later, something like that, and we had a phone call, and I didn't realize that you were one of those dudes in that first video that I watched 3 months ago who was in that Modern Wisdom podcast. So, brother, talk to me about that. And like, it's so interesting to me how the internet works, and you just keep running into the same people and you're like, oh, wow, like that person is also there. And yeah, so talk to me about Modern Wisdom, how that came to be, and like what your role was in helping start that. And also just like, dude, that's so crazy. It's so cool. So yeah, talk to me a little bit about that.
It is always funny when that stuff happens. And, if I'm to get metaphysical about it, I think that when you start to resonate at a certain level, I think you start to attract other people on the same plane. Mm-hmm. And I think that process is obviously accelerated with social media and algorithms, but I'm convinced that it also happens at a more analog level as well. But yeah, so so Chris from Modern Wisdom, his growth has been insane recently, and basically he's a guy who used to live with one of my old business partners, and we had a podcast, and he was like, "Oh, guys, can I see how you do this podcast? Like, can I come on?" We were like, "Yeah, sure." Like, so we had him on as a guest to talk about his experience of CrossFit. So we thought, bro bodybuilder tries CrossFit would be quite a kind of BuzzFeedy title to do. He did that. This was a few years ago, and he kind of caught the bug of podcasting, and he was like, "Do you know what? This is my calling. I'm gonna go balls into this." So he made the shift from club promoter to podcaster, set up Modern Wisdom, and he's had a lot of big names on there over the last couple of years. He's been insanely consistent with it, and it's been great to see his growth as well, because he's taken it very much in kind of creating a platform, really with his aim to be the kind of the British Joe Rogan, which I think he's very much on his way to becoming.
Yeah, he's doing an incredible job, and every day it seems like I'll come up with I'll see a new Modern Wisdom podcast and be like, oh my God, I know I've been reading this dude's work for a long time, and this guy. So yeah, hats off to Chris for what he's done, because it's what have you seen from his growth in the past 2 years, really since he started, that allowed him to go so far so fast, seemingly?
The growth has actually been, it's been it's been exponential. So the last couple of months has been where most of the growth we've seen in absolute terms. What he's done really well from the outset is he's looked at how does the iTunes algorithm work. And at the time of launch, it may well have changed now. There was a process that Tim Ferriss outlined of kind of basically blasting your episodes at quite high frequency to begin with, and then give the podcast feed some regularity to predict. So he made it into the podcast charts with that, started to get some momentum. Obviously, having big guests on is going to expand your reach, being able to get those episodes shared. Plus the fact that he is a very innately curious guy. He's just very good with conversation. He's very good with kind of getting the best out of people. And I think that really that's where his genius lies. And so making sure that the quality of your content is good, that it's a medium that matches your personality. So I always say this to my clients as well, is that if you're afraid of the camera, don't do video. If you don't like the way that you sound on a microphone, then don't do podcasting. Pick the medium that suits the way that you think and the way that you produce best. If you've got someone who's highly extroverted and a bit ADHD, they're perfect for video, but they're maybe not so good for writing long form blog posts. So he's done that well. He's matched the format of his content production to who he is. The other thing is, aside from the consistency, is having video guy Dean, who's actually he's a friend of ours who is a full-time videographer, and he really believed in the mission as well. And he's the one who filmed us on that table that you will have seen in the video. He's kind of the production side behind this, so he's been nailing the YouTube side, the thumbnails, the trailers, all that stuff. So I think it's worked out as a very well run team.
It's so fascinating too, because you look at a production, you look at a show, and you just see the face of it, but so often the background is where, is the unsung heroes. And very cool. Shout out to Dean. Didn't even know he existed before this podcast, but very cool.
Dean is an absolute pro. He's just an artist of his field. I hope he comes onto the podcast at some point, because I think it would be like the great reveal to see the brains behind the podcast.
Yeah, that's like Joe Rogan, and I always want Jamie to be a guest. Jamie's his producer and editor. Yeah, so I think that's really valuable for people to see that the other half of the production team, or there are other sides to this, and they've been through their own whole journey as well. So really cool to point out. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was the PDF, the Life Hacks PDF on Modern Wisdom. And the reason why I bring this up to you is because your name is in it all around. There's so many life hacks where it's like Yusef likes this one or Jonny likes this one. And so Chris, this is Chris's PDF. You really gave credit to, the three of you as just like the creators of this, because you guys have done a bunch of episodes on different life hacks. I think like 9 or 10 or something crazy. So
sure.
So talk to me about some of your favorite life hacks, because I think that aligns with people who are listening to this podcast as well.
Yeah. So actually, to define a life hack, I believe it's an item or a behavior that improves your quality of life. Mm-hmm. And the episodes that you will have heard on Modern Wisdom, that's basically, we just do kind of like a round robin of what are some things that are improving our lives. And I'm working on a longer form blog post that's more of mine specifically as well. The way that I would categorize these is there's the essentials, so there's the absolute fundamentals, but then there's also physique hacks, things to do with your productivity, digital life, social hacks, mindset hacks, money hacks, and then just items that you can usually buy for under $100 that just make your life a little bit easier as well. So to start from the beginning, I think the fundamentals are the ones that you really need to have in place regardless. And this is maybe so fundamental that it's not even a hack, but just don't be tired. Sleep is the kind of thing that people just ignore because it's boring to try and optimize. But when you're sleep deprived, like everything is just functioning on half fuel. Your cognition worsens. I certainly noticed that under kind of slightly more intense sleep deprivation. So if I'm on night shifts, by the time I'm on the fourth night, my brain feels like it's operating at 40%. Like someone will ask me, oh, how many milligrams of this does this patient need? And you'd be like, sat there thinking, this is a question that would be so simple during the day, but because it's 4 a.m, you're just staring at a screen like, okay, hang on, milligrams, micrograms, like so. We know that there's a higher level of car accidents, of cardiac events, of emotional, your emotional intelligence drops. Like all these things are affected downstream from being underslept. So some of the easy wins you can do for your sleep: have some blackout blinds. If you can't do that, have an eye mask. If you live in a noisy environment, earplugs. You want to be sleeping in a relatively cool environment. And so counterintuitively, having a warm shower or bath before bed will allow your core temperature to drop, because the acute heat is going to cause a vasodilatation, and then your core temperature is basically going to allow that to radiate out so that your temperature does drop before you go to bed. Have a bedtime routine. I'm a huge fan of a brain dump before bed. So if you, like, say 2 hours before bed, you start winding down. So you finish your work for the day. If you have any open loops, you schedule when you're going to do them in the morning. If you have anything on your mind that's still spinning, it's really important to have something in place to say, right, I'm going to close it for now. I'm going to pick it up tomorrow in the morning. And doing that as a formal process so that your brain can fully switch off and trust that when you wake up tomorrow, when you open your laptop, that it's all going to be there for you to deal with, and you don't have to be sat mincing over it overnight.
I love what you said about closing open loops, because I find that personally, when I text someone and I'm in the middle of a text conversation and they don't respond, that is still on my brain, whether I realize it consciously or unconsciously. And I've thought about why that is. And I've come to the conclusion that it's because it's very unnatural for us to say something to someone or ask someone a question and then for them not to respond. Like, imagine if during this conversation I asked you something and then you just like stopped the conversation entirely and got up. I would be thinking in my head like, okay, did I say something wrong? What is going on? So I think it's very unnatural, and our brains are not programmed and designed to say something to someone and then for them not to say anything back. So it's really fascinating, and I love that idea of closing loops.
You're absolutely right. There's so many of these examples, like the other one you pointed out of doing a podcast on video, where because of technology, we've introduced these unnatural elements to normal conversation, where, as you said, that just before we started recording, that if you have a video on, it doesn't represent normal conversation, in that you wouldn't just go up to someone, hold a mirror to their face and ask them questions. But there's so many elements of online behavior that have kind of perverted this course a little bit. Mm-hmm. So some of them, obviously, the things at scale that we're seeing, but also, the asynchronous conversation. And it has its advantages. I think it's great for something like coaching, where you can. So we prefer to do coaching through asynchronicity, because it allows you to then take the person's week, send them a considered response, either by voice note or video, and then they digest the response. They look at how they can implement it, they can replay it, rather than if it's in a conversation, you often find that certain bits get missed, or you're like, oh, what were they saying there, or whatever. So having that recording and time to consider a response can be very helpful, but at the same time, it's not a natural way to communicate.
Dude, I love how you brought up the nuance to what I was saying and gave the positive to it, because you're absolutely right in the sense of when when we are having a text conversation or an email conversation, we are actually storing that information, and we can then pull it up whenever we want, and it almost becomes part of our brain at that point. And that's such a positive, because you, like you said, you can come back to that whenever you want. And I think it's so interesting how, I was looking at the negative of this, and you explained the positive, and it's so true, man. Like, and I think, and I urge everyone listening to do that. Like, whenever you think of a positive or a negative, ask yourself, or have someone smarter than you, like you, tell that to someone else and explain to them the opposite side of that. So thank you very much, brother.
You're right, man. It's a double-edged sword. And, we were talking about this when you called me the other day, that something like Twitter, you just said there that you see what someone says and it becomes part of your mind. That is a double-edged sword, and that's a huge one, because on the one hand, you've got a feed which is curated from people that you have chosen to follow. Now, we tend to follow people relatively indiscriminately, or at least I did. I'm now trying to kind of spend some time unfollowing. But what happens is that, especially with something like a Twitter feed or an Instagram feed, it is very slowly programming your mind a certain way. And if you are not careful about who it is you're choosing to share thoughts with and to resonate with, then it's the same as being as indiscriminate about what you put in your mouth. Most people are very discriminate about what they put in their mouth, but not so much about what they put in their mind, what kind of media they consume, what kind of people they follow. And this all does have an unconscious effect on the basic ground that our mind functions on. That all of the mass of information in our minds forms the subconscious, and that is the soil. It's the ground that your conscious thoughts will come out of. So I think we've got to be very careful how you cultivate that.
Absolutely. And it's so funny, because it's like, I had a tweet the other week that was saying, like, thank you for following me. You're actually letting me brainwash you. And
yeah.
it's really true. And what's really interesting is that the scale that Twitter, that the internet provides in allowing brainwashing and allowing, like, if 50 years ago I had this thought, right? I had any random thought. We're talking about 1970. I have a thought and it just pops into my head. Okay, the chances of someone else understanding that thought and having that thought, getting to their mind, that would take a long time. That would take, it depends on who you were and what your platform was. But if you're just the average person on the street, you might need to write a letter, or you might need to direct that thought to a specific place, or call someone up on the phone. But now you have the scale and the leverage of the internet, which allows me to write a thought, and then immediately that thought gets downloaded into thousands of people's brains. I mean, it's really absurd if you think about it from that level.
It's a massive responsibility for the content creator. It's,
Yes.
The fact, as you said, like, one thought can, with very little friction, like, how long does it take you to write out 280 characters, can just be part of thousands of people's brains. And I think the people, this is what people need to be very careful of. And that's why I think we need to get so conscious about what information we're consuming, is that because of that low friction, because it doesn't require much effort for someone to put a thought out there, they might not be basing that on any evidence. And we see that a lot with people on Twitter giving out medical advice. Like, I saw something today about someone claiming that coffee, fasting, and cold showers cures their cancer, and if they ever, stuff like this. But you're like, well, if it's so easy for someone to post a thought out, then this is going to be the case. And 50 years ago, for someone to have written a book, they had to have jumped through so many more hurdles and thought so much more carefully about what they were going to say, that being an author carried a lot more prestige, because you knew that this is someone who's been deep in the cave and really produced a work of art. Whereas now you can self-publish, or there's lower friction to doing that. So So I think that the problem here with social media is that, yes, it can be used to your advantage, and I think it's a very powerful tool to build a brand. But if you're consuming social media, you need to recognize that, I don't think that the algorithm is malicious. I don't think there's anything particularly malicious about the system. The system is morally neutral, but the problem is that human nature optimizes for quick dopamine and easy platitudes. And so as a result, and the other thing it optimizes for is outrage. We know that posts that provoke outrage get the most engagement. They get the most likes or the most comments on them. And so naturally the algorithm is just going to optimize for things that get the most engagement on them. And that's why the whole fake news thing came about, because if you can start just posting stuff that's going to rustle jimmies and piss people off, then it's going to get loads of engagement. So I think we've just got to be quite careful and realize that the algorithm isn't supporting or hindering us. It's just what it is. And we're the ones that need to put the barriers in place ourselves.
Yeah. And what you touch on, it hits at one of my core beliefs, which actually Eric Jorgensen talked about in the last episode, is that reality is neither positive nor negative, right? You're talking about it in the context of social media. It's like, if we draw that out to life in general is neither positive nor negative, it allows us to then create our own interpretation and allows us, if we understand that and we believe that to be true, we can then say, okay, if it's neither positive nor negative, that what just happened, how can I give my own interpretation to it and understand that and internalize it?
100%.
So one thing that you've had a lot of experience in is, it seems like from your website and from previous conversations, is meditation, right? And meditation is something that someone listening maybe has never done. If someone listening has never done meditation, what do you suggest they do?
Good question. So meditation, I think, has been poorly marketed, or you could say extremely well marketed, but for the wrong. It's basically become like the 6-minute abs of the meditation world, and that's what's taken the forefront with publicly available mindfulness programs. And it's often referred to as muck mindfulness by serious meditators. And I think it's great that they're getting it out there. They're growing the popularity of meditation as a practice. What I think people need to be careful with is just to have realistic expectations of what they will get out of meditation. The same way that because when someone says, oh, you can just meditate 6 minutes a day and get some benefit, realistically, if you told someone you can train for 6 minutes a day, like you wouldn't get a huge amount of benefit from that. Like, it's something you're going to have to take quite seriously. So with that said, recognizing that what you're doing here and the goal of this is ultimately undoing the illusion of self, and you're structurally and functionally changing your brain, that this is going to take a bit of effort, and it is going to require undoing a lot of the old habits that we've built over time. Then we can say, right, what's the method? What's the approach that we'd want to take with this? Now, I'm not a stickler for any particular school of meditation, any particular method. I think the important thing is to match it to your temperament. So if you are a particularly cerebral person, if you live from the neck up, if you're very mind focused, then maybe doing more of that is not the way you want to go. You need something maybe to counterbalance that. So I would suggest a more heart or body oriented practice, something like heart math or yoga or breath work. Alternatively, if you're a very emotionally driven person, very physical, but your mind is all over the place, then a more mental meditation practice like a concentration or vipassana approach is going to work better. So do you see what I'm saying here? It's kind of like on a physical level, if you have some guy who's like, like naturally like fat, strong guy who's just a bit of a beast, but he's never really trained. You wouldn't say, oh, this guy needs to do weightlifting. You'd say this guy probably needs to do a bit of stretching and running and eat a bit less food. But if you've got the person who's naturally very skinny but a bit fragile and kind of underfed, you'd be like, well, this person needs to eat more and lift weights. So it's about looking at what are your specific weaknesses and how can you counterbalance that.
I love that. And I love that we keep coming back to this thought of like, we need to tailor the plan for the specific individual. And it's really true. After doing yoga and doing mindfulness meditation, it's like both are forms of meditation. Just sitting with your thoughts is a form of meditation, as is doing yoga. And that's like meditation for my body. And it's really true. The question that comes to mind is like, how do you identify what you are? Like, how do you separate yourself in terms of either camp?
How do you diagnose which one, where your main bottleneck is?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is often, it's funny because the tool that we're using to identify the bottleneck is the tool that we're training. We're training our awareness and our sharpness of concentration, our ability to recognize what's going on in our body. And so sometimes hiring a coach and having someone look at you objectively and say, this is what you need, that can be very helpful. The other way to approach this is to do all of it and then figure out what did you get the most benefit from.
Yep.
I certainly think that there's no harm in having a meditation and a yoga and a breath work practice, but naturally that's going to be time consuming. And so you've got to kind of, you can kind of play around with it. You could do the CrossFit of the meditation world. Dude,
I have so much love for you because you are the doctor that I always want to go to. Like, truly. And so,
oh, man.
No, what I mean by that is like, you go to a doctor in 2020 and you see they're overweight and you see they've never trained a day in their life. And you say to yourself, how is this possible? We know weight training and increasing muscle mass and eating correctly is going to lead to longevity. It would be the same way if you're looking in 1970 at a doctor who smoked. You'd be like, what is going on here? And the point is you are focused on pursuing the greatest version of yourself and leading to longevity and doing all these things to help your body and mind. It's like, that's the person you want to go to for your health. So you've touched on this in the past hour about what you're doing and you're becoming a physician or you're in medical school right now, right? And so
I'm a qualified doctor at the minute.
Oh, you're actually a doctor.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. My apologies, Dr. Yusef.
I think actually when it might be because when you saw the Life Hacks series, I was a medical student back then. They were recorded a few years ago.
There you go. Okay, that makes complete sense. Thank you for throwing me that bone. So talk to me about that and talk to me about being a doctor and just like how that has changed your perception of just life in general and how it's like how you've applied all these things that you've learned, meditation, lifting weights, eating right. How have you seen that in the medical community and talk to me about that?
Oh man, yeah, big question. And thank you for the kind words as well. I appreciate that. I think this is a huge topic, and with doctors walking the walk, or as you said, not smoking, being examples of health to their patients. I very much think that if you are a doctor, you have a level of responsibility to your patients, and if you are, you're seen by them as the bastion of health. And so I think if you're doing something lifestyle-wise that is overtly unhealthy, obviously, you can't be expected to be on duty all the time, but you have to accept that you pay your money, you take your choice, and the consequence of that is that your patients won't take you seriously. You won't be seen as credible. The same way that you wouldn't hire a fat personal trainer or a driving instructor who can't drive. I think you have to have some degree of credibility with what you're doing. Now, the counter argument is that, you can have a male gynecologist and he doesn't need to demonstrate any kind of credibility. Or you could say that a doctor's job is more kind of diagnosing and administering treatment rather than being a living example. But it doesn't sit fully well with me if they're completely detached from doing things to improve their own health, or at least to modify their own risk factors. And so, yeah, you're right. If you have a doctor who smokes or a doctor who's overweight, telling their patient you need to do these things, of course the patient either might be polite and not say anything, but of course they're going to be thinking, well, it's all right for you, doctor, but I've just seen you smoking outside the hospital. So yeah, I definitely think we need to walk the walk in anything that we're going to be professing ourselves.
So how has it changed your perception of life actually being a doctor? And like, do you see patients every day? Like, how does that work? And how has that changed your mind in terms of anything, really?
Yeah, so it's amazing, actually. I'm so glad that I took this route, because qualifying as a doctor has been the hardest thing I've ever done, in that it's really pushed it's pushed me beyond what I thought my limits were, and it's forced me to grow so much as a person. And I think the conclusion I've got from this is that putting yourself into a system that is going to really put you through your paces will force you to grow. And whatever that system is, as long as it's something that is greater than you, and you have to get a bit kind of like the Sufi saying that if you're a candle burning, you have to kind of burn yourself down to be able to give off the light, to be able to give off the gift of what you are. That it does. It's a bit of a baptism of fire, but you come out the other end, and I'm so grateful and so privileged to be able to deliver care in that way. I think it's something that, yeah, if I had to do it again, I absolutely would.
It's fascinating, man, because what you touch on is so true to human nature, in the sense that whenever we put ourselves through challenges, whenever we look at something difficult staring in front of us, like going to medical school or trying to lift weights and trying to build muscle and lose fat, not to compare the two, but just to point out that they're both difficult challenges. And whenever we take that step to expand ourselves, what we find is that, one, it's a challenge, obviously, and two, you come out of it a slightly different person, and a slightly better person, in the sense of now you've been through some stuff. And I said in the last podcast, like, there's wisdom in the grind. Like, there is wisdom that comes out of pursuing a difficult challenge. And yeah, man, hats off to you. And just, it really changes you. Whenever you pursue a difficult challenge, you understand that this is going to be, my life is going to be different from here on out. And that's a good thing.
Very much, man. And yeah, there's a lot of that you have to kind of forge yourself as a new person to be able to respond to the challenges that you're faced with, and there's that, again, a bit of a cheesy saying about the sculptor having to kind of chip away at himself to reveal what's underneath. But yeah, it certainly is an emotionally exhausting job at times. You have to very much come to terms with death quite consistently. You have to be able to switch role quite a lot depending on the patient. Some people are in hospital, but they don't want to be treated. They're very aggressive. That it's not all kind of it's not always a smooth teamwork experience. Very different to coaching, in fact, because with coaching, someone has chosen to put their money where their mouth is, and they've actually paid you for your time. Whereas in a hospital, particularly in a public healthcare system, people are there because they're unwell and they're pissed off, and they don't necessarily want to see you, but you're there to stabilize them and get them better. So it's a very different dynamic, and it's so interesting.
Wow, that's so fascinating because from my perspective, I always looked at coaching, online coaching or fitness coaching as like almost a doctor itself. And I'm wondering, did you view that the same way before you started actual medical school?
Yeah, I think coaching is very similar to primary care or being a general practitioner in some ways, because they've come to your clinic. They're usually well enough, they're not completely horizontal, and they've got a specific problem where you're coming to a mutual agreement and a management plan. Now, the difficulty comes where there is an overlap with coaching and lifestyle medicine or preventative medicine, where you have someone that might come with a specific problem. They're looking for a pill as a solution, but actually the real solution is stop smoking or eat less food consistently for the next 6 months. Like, these are not very sexy answers, and they're often going to be met with a bit of resistance. Like, well, doctor, can't I just have the pill and, send me out the door? And so this is maybe where people have some degree of cynicism for the medical system, because if a doctor has 7 minutes with a patient, they're not going to be able realistically to sell somebody onto the idea of eating a calorie deficit for 6 months, or to convince someone who's been smoking for 20 years to just quit smoking. Like, the patient needs to have buy-in to improving their life as well. And so I think this is where there's a big overlap of where someone can, where coaching can fit in, as long as someone is bought into it. I'm sure you've had this where someone might buy coaching for a friend or a family member as a present, but that person never engages with it because they didn't have to invest in it themselves. It's a very nice present for someone to buy their brother a coaching package and say, "Oh, it's going to help you," but if they're not invested, they're not going to commit.
So true. You need that personal investment if you want to see any success in anything. So, dude, you do so much. You're a doctor, you run a business, and you read a lot of books. Like, you're obviously a productivity machine. Talk to me about some of the tips that you would have to someone else who's like, how does this dude do all these things? What are your tips for that?
Yeah, so I just recorded a series on this, actually, because I thought it was a very common question I was getting, and I thought I need to formalize this into a step-by-step workflow. And to give you the kind of cliff notes of it, the first step is that what is more important than how? So it's important to know what you eventually want your ideal day to look like, and then reverse engineer that, because quite often it's easy to just have our heads in the corner, we're just working away at something, and then we look up 5 years later and we're like, oh shit, like I've just been working in the completely wrong direction here. And now I've got to kind of backpedal and figure out what it is that I want. The other thing is to have some respect for your time and recognize that if there's anything that doesn't have to be done by you, then your time is better served doing the thing that is your core genius and outsourcing everything else. I know some people disagree with this, but I'm a huge proponent of outsourcing your cleaning, your ironing, your meal prep, anything that, unless you particularly get some joy out of doing it, or it's how you make your money, then you need to outsource it, because you need to free up the bandwidth to do the things that you need to be doing. The next step is just having a clear workspace. And it's going to sound silly, but get a Mac, get an Apple computer, because if you're working on Windows, you're just running through treacle constantly, and it is awful. So having a clear workspace and a Mac, from a tech perspective, that's going to supercharge your productivity. Then beyond that, focusing on working in slots of deep work and shallow work, and having boxes of time where you're doing work within a specific context, as we were talking about before. So in my case, that's having admin or firefighting days where it's lots of shallow work and clearing the inboxes and things. And then other days where you've got Wi-Fi off and you're going deep on a specific project or a specific creation. The thing that I certainly need to do more of is have days where you're completely off, completely offline, and you're just going deep into your body. And the thing that you talked about of having this retreat and going out to some wood cabin and just being completely offline, like barely speaking to people, I think that is beautiful. And you definitely get to a point where you yearn to do something like that just to give yourself some mental space.
Yeah, I think for the retreat in particular, it's important not to, at least for me personally, not to like idealize it, right? And it was certainly beneficial, and I certainly will do it again. But, I tend to think, oh, life will be better in this state or that state. And yeah, it's a problem for me because I want to refocus myself and be so grateful for this moment. So just something that I think about. But going back to...
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah, it's a never-ending challenge. But,
yeah.
This conversation makes it easier to do. Talk about, you mentioned your core genius. And you mentioned it briefly, how you want to do your core genius and focus on it. So it made me think, like, what do you consider your personal source of core genius?
I think we're always refining it. But
yeah.
For me, at present, it feels like it is distilling the core actions, the main things in various domains to save people time. So the four key domains that I divide my life into are body, being, balance, and business. That's a framework from Garrett J. White. So body, some kind of physical practice; being, spiritual practice; balance, relationships and friends; and business or career. And so the content that I create is really taking the Pareto efficient rules or values or principles to avoid or to save people a lot of the time that I wasted in coming to the most optimal ways to approach each of these things.
I love that. That makes so much sense. And it reminds me, what were your four? Your four were being, for one more time for
so,
people who might have missed it.
Sure. So body, being, balance, and business. I've heard people refer to the same ones as health, wealth, love, and happiness. Same categories.
Yeah, it reminds me of Daniel Bork's. I don't know if you're familiar with Daniel Bork. He's a future podcast guest and seems like a cool dude who you'd get along with.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
His four are eat, move, learn, and make. So it's interesting how, it's a similar type of idea. Like if you have four things or you have just a handful of things that to base your life around, it really gives you the ability to say, okay, is what I'm doing right now aligned with my four things in any way? And if I'm not, okay, like I'm just going to stop doing that, right? So I think
it's
super
so
helpful.
Easy to become imbalanced with it as well. Unless you have clarity or oversight that you have these four categories to take care of. And this is a framework that I've stolen from Garrett J. White, who works with this framework in much more depth. But he primarily works with, like, his avatar is kind of overweight businessmen who have become spiritually disconnected and divorced from their wives or lost touch with their kids because they've been optimizing for one thing in their life, which is the business. And so the whole process is that you hit a single in every quadrant and you don't worry about trying to hit a home run. And so every Monday buys his wife flowers, has some kind of daily spiritual practice, like trains 4 times a week or whatever. Like it's nothing exceptional, but it's about making sure that no one of those things slips and you're just hitting a single in each one. And that's what I found so fascinating about the fact that you have been so consistent over the last 75 days or so by doing the 75 Hard program.
Yeah, brother. I mean, I started this program a year ago, and it's like I've spent 165 days on this program, and
Oh, it's a bit more than 75 days then.
yeah, but it's the same concept in the sense of it's just like if you realize that you can do a few things every day and those things will help you, what comes out of it on the other side is like someone else entirely, like a different individual. And it goes back to just like pursuing hard challenges and realizing that hard challenges are not so much about intensity of effort, although they can be, and it can have periods of intense effort, but consistency is really where that comes from and really where your success will come from long term, and consistency with small habits. Like I work out 2 times a day, but it's like one of those can be a walk, one of those can be yoga, one of those can be a weightlifting session, but it's like that consistency over a long period of time will transform you. And
twice a day is so impressive. It's not sexy, the consistency thing, but it works. You know, I think it would be great if it wasn't the case. You know, if you could say like, right, I'm just going to do 10 years of yoga today.
Dude,
like, just going to bash it all out now. But
yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but it's crazy because this was such a key point for me in the sense of when I sat down and said, I had this realization that 24 hours of working out, of lifting weights over a period of one day was not equal to 24 hours of working out over 24 days. You know, it's the same amount of time. And but it's like it has such a different result, and really internalizing that. You know what I mean? That was a huge shift for me in terms of understanding the power of doing things every day, the power of doing things over a consistent period of time. And it's really true, brother. Like you said, 10 years of yoga in one day would be great, but you really need the sleeps, you really need the nights, the days to really get the full benefit of that.
I'm a bit late to the game with reading Atomic Habits by James Clear, but his point about compound interest, again, being a double-edged sword was quite sobering when he says, like, if you're 1% better every day, think how, you know, you, I don't know, like 37,000% better by the end of the year. But if you're 1% worse every day, that is equally destructive. And it is pretty scary. You can't take your foot off the pedal. But on the other hand, you don't need to be revving the engine so hard. You know, you just slow amounts of consistency every day, which is, you know, once you've got those systems in place. I think the big insight that I've had kind of this year is that if you get into the habit of thinking, I'll skip it today because it's just today, and that becomes the new mode of thinking, that then repeats itself. And then a year later, it's always been just today. And you've made so many concessions that you've kind of degraded as a person. And so, yeah, it's a huge double-edged sword.
Every action that we take is a vote for the person that we want to be. And this is a James Clear quote, or I believe it's a James Clear quote.
I think it is, yeah.
And it's just like so true in the sense of, like, it makes you understand that every action you take has meaning. And what I also think about related to this is like when I'm working out 2 times a day, or when I'm doing something beneficial for me, that is time that I'm not spending doing something that's going to hurt me. So this seems like an obvious concept, but really like breaking this down, right, is like, okay, so I'm working out and I'm outside in nature. And so that means that I'm not on my phone scrolling through Instagram or just watching a TV show that's not going to help me. Like, doing something positive actually means that in most cases you're not doing something negative, which is equally beneficial.
Yeah, and you mentioned George McGill recently. I think the example he gave about inversion as a mental model was really interesting, where I think he was actually talking to Chris, who was a nightclub promoter, and he was like, okay, so if you're running a nightclub, one way to look at it is, rather than thinking, how can I make the best night out ever? How can I make it such an awesome night? But instead, how can I avoid it being the worst night ever? Like, well, okay, if there's a fire, that would be pretty terrible. If anyone like stands on glass or dies, that would also be pretty bad. If the police come, that's quite. So it's like, okay, so let's just, rather than trying to shoot for the moon, we just say, how can we just avoid the catastrophic things happening? And then as a result, the better things can come out of that.
Yeah, and that comes from Charlie Munger, I believe, which is like, the inversion principle, and super helpful to just internalize and put that mental model inside your brain, because you really can make a lot of progress by just asking yourself, how can things not be the worst, or how can we avoid failure in this area? They actually turn out to be pretty good if you don't ruin yourself.
So much. So with Charlie Munger as well, like how to have a good investment portfolio. Don't lose money. Like, don't blow your account. So I've definitely made that mistake before. And the similar with percentages, if you go all on red on your trading account and you blow 50% of your account, you don't have to then make 50% to get back to where you were. You have to make 100%. And so the odds are stacked against you if you blow your account. So it's like, how do you, in any aspect of life, how do you not blow your account, rather than how do I try and hit a home run? And that's why I think with training, number one rule, don't get injured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so fascinating to me how you have so many different areas of knowledge, I would say. And let me know if I'm wrong. It's like everything is the same. Like the key principles in all these areas are the same. You want to get better? Do it consistently. You want to, not screw up? Okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? How do you avoid that? Like the ideas are the same for doing things well in different areas. And that's so fascinating, because it means that you can study how someone's doing in a completely different field than you. And if they're doing it really well, you can then apply some of those tools and tactics to your own life.
It's fantastic, isn't it? I'm so glad that it's simple and these things do apply across the board. Because I'm not a smart guy. I don't work well with complicated rules and everything. I prefer to have simple guidelines to follow, and to know that actually in most cases the solution is not sexy, it's not a magic bullet, it's just about consistent application of the basics, means that then you can relax and just focus on the execution, as you said.
It gives me tremendous hope for this podcast. It gives me tremendous hope for life. Just that to know that, everyone else is looking for some formula, how to increase podcast ratings in 2 days, and everyone else is looking for the quick fix. But if I know that really it's just about the long term, and it's really just about putting them out, it's really just about recording these episodes, well, that gives me tremendous freedom to understand that, hey, every episode won't be perfect. I'll make a mistake here and there, like not calling a doctor, and that gives me freedom to understand that, it's all part of the process. It's all a learning experience, and it's all there to serve you. And eventually you get better and better as you do it and put in the work and put in the reps, and it's all the same, right, brother?
100%, man. And the irony is people spend years looking for a quick fix, and I've definitely been guilty of that as well. And you look back and you're like, if I just, rather than looking for the ultimate bit of software, if I just used Microsoft Excel this whole time, I would have made so much more progress. So yeah, and I think the work that you're doing, the content that you're putting out, the energy and the consistency of your podcast, it's just bound to succeed. There's no other choice. So, I think it's a matter of time, and I'm so glad to see that from what you were saying last time, that you've kind of realigned with your authentic truth, and that this is the message that you're putting forward. So I'm really pleased to be part of it.
Awesome, brother. Well, I'm so pleased to have you today, and this conversation has absolutely flown by. And we're definitely going to need to do this again sometime, because, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, and I feel like we've been friends for so long because we've been reading so many of the similar books and similar ideas and applying some of the same concepts to our own lives. So, dude,
So true, man. This is the
right?
resonance field, isn't it? Well,
Yeah.
listen, I would love to have you on our podcast to continue this conversation if you're up for it.
Absolutely, brother. I mean, it's a pleasure. It's so easy to speak to you. It's like actually talking to a friend, and I just want to give you a hug, brother, because it's like it's crazy how someone in a completely different part of the world can resonate with you and resonate with what you've learned and what you've studied for what I've studied for the past, I don't know, 5-10 years in terms of all this stuff and applying it. So super grateful for you, brother.
Likewise, man.
Before we wrap
You've always
this,
got somewhere to stay in the UK as well.
awesome. Well, before we wrap this baby up, tell everyone where they could find you out on the interwebs.
So Propane Fitness, that is propane like the gas, not our stance on pain. And you can see that on YouTube, Twitter, or Instagram are probably our main channels. You can also go to propanefitness.com or propane-business.com for the business content. But yeah, any of those channels, you can find the rest of it.
Awesome. And they've got some great articles. They've got some great videos, super informative stuff. You guys should definitely check that out. And see ya in the next one.
Thanks, man. Speak soon.
That was my episode with Dr. Yusef Smith. I really appreciate you guys listening until the final seconds. If you enjoyed this episode, you can leave a review on iTunes. That really helps other people find the show. Or you can let me know on Twitter at HeyDannyMiranda. I love your feedback and I appreciate you so much. Have a wonderful day and I'll see you guys in the next one.